once before.
Really? Wow.
When you and I were doing it, when you were showing me how to go live.
Yeah.
But like, I've always associated you as being a person who helps me go more live.
Oh,
it's true. It's
how
true.
metaphorical of you. Gareth, I'm so happy to be talking with you and everyone else who is here on this lovely Zoom gathering. Not Zoom, but Facebook and whatever the other thing is. YouTube. As you can tell, I'm very tech savvy. Shall I start us off with a song just so people can gather, have time to settle in? All right.
Idea.
So, feel free to tell me if the guitar needs to be louder or whatever. Actually, I'm talking to the people in the comments now because, anyway, here we go. I must confess about this trick I do. I like to disappear. You ask if I can just be present with you. Next moment I'm not here. It's so easy to slip into a bottle or fall into a cellular phone. Tap the glass just like magic. Suddenly you know you're alone. Like a magician with a black top hat. You've seen this trick before. Gone like a rabbit when we talk like that. The way you ask for more. I don't know how to be inside my body and face the stuff I don't want to feel. Tap the hat, gone like magic anytime it's getting too real. When I was young, I used to tour this show. I had the pattern down. I'd ask a volunteer I did not know. Trust me, I'd skip town. I got so good at the disappearing magic, the showmanship was deep in my bones. Hide my heart, years of practice, now I'm disappearing at home. It's so easy, I can slip away unseen. Ah, yeah, I'm the disappearing man. Now, when I get cornered, I can give you the slip, but I don't go out the door. You've never seen a disappearance like this, except all those times before. It's so easy to slip into a bottle or fall into a cellular phone. Tap the glass just like magic. Suddenly you know you're alone. I can go out like a candle flame or drift away like sand. I just look the same. I'm the disappearing man. No one can see me, but I look the same. I'm the disappearing man. What are you afraid of, Dave? Why are you disappearing like that? Are you afraid to really show up? Yeah, kinda, sometimes. Well, maybe we should talk about that. Do you wanna? Yeah, if I could have a friend to talk to. How about Gareth? He's kind and good. Yeah. Gareth, would you talk to me about fear? Are you willing? Yay! You know, I remember the call that I got from you years ago when you were having a panic attack and you just needed a little grounding. And since then, you have worked really hard to not torture yourself with unnecessary fears. And you've kind of learned how to do that and marked the trail for the rest of us. And I am grateful for that work. And I know that that work was done in self-preservation, but you have done this sort of bodhisattva trick about like sharing that wisdom with us. And I am grateful. The book is How Not to Be Afraid, because obviously you don't want to not be afraid ever. I mean, there's kind of things that are definitely good to be afraid of. But most of the fears, do they do us any good? No. So there are ways that are good to be afraid, and there are ways that are not good to be afraid. What was the analogy that you just used when we were talking?
So there was a TV show called What Not to Wear. The point of that show was not that you shouldn't wear anything ever.
Yes.
Obviously, there are nice times to not wear anything. The book's called How Not to Be Afraid for exactly the reason you just named.
Yeah.
I think we fear the wrong things a lot of the time, or we fear the right things in the wrong way, and it's perfectly natural. Partly because our brains have a negativity or an anxiety bias that has evolved because we used to have legitimate, genuine fears that there might be a saber-toothed tiger or a rampaging horde of villagers around the next corner. And the problem is our brains haven't evolved quickly enough to catch up with the realities of our culture, the things that are worth being afraid of and the things that aren't. The good news is your brain is lying to you. I'll tell you why that's good news in a minute. The good news is what we call the media, which is ultimately everybody that has one of these, is also distorting reality, and our political culture is not a proportionate picture of reality either. Makes everything feel like an emergency, and you can never tell the difference between something that's genuinely urgent and something that's perhaps the flip side of something really positive. I've started to think that the world has become both too big and too small at the same time. Too big meaning because of the internet, we have more access to more information about more things than we've ever had. And it can feel like we're totally overwhelmed by the enormity of everything. And too small because it feels like it's all happening right next door. And there's no editorial filter that's connected to wisdom to help us make sense, even at a mundane sociological reality of how things have gotten better in lots of ways over time. Never mind at the deeper levels of the soul, where it actually doesn't really matter whether they've gotten better in sociological terms or not, because things that last longer aren't actually subject to external circumstances. So yes, it's good to be afraid of walking too close to the edge of a cliff. It's good to put on your seatbelt because you're concerned about what might happen if you're in a traffic accident. It's good to not put your foot too hard down on the accelerator. Those are naturally occurring, legitimate, necessary fears that will help us. All the other fears are also naturally occurring, but they're not necessarily necessary, and they don't necessarily help us. And the reason I wrote the book was because I have been overwhelmed by lots of unnecessary or unhelpful fear. And I wanted to learn how to transform it. And along the way, I discovered you don't ever get rid of it, but you can actually learn some practices that turn terror into excitement and turn a form of death, and I'm talking about the bad kind, into more life.
Yeah. So it isn't
My,
just.
my beautiful assistant just handed me headphones because he's saying he can't hear me well. Are you able to hear me?
I can hear you, although I think my level is a little higher than yours now. I think when we tested our mics, you were sitting closer because you were typing.
I was.
And
I
so,
should sit a little closer.
yeah.
There we go. Right?
Yeah, and about
So there's
an inch
folks in
and
the comments, if you're having a hard time hearing me, please put a comment there to say so.
and feel free to like put a little inch and a half pillow under too, so we can be the same height. We have to. It's all very egalitarian here. So I know.
Neck pillow.
Excellent. That'll work just fine. Now, when I get overwhelmed, I notice that it happens incrementally and I'm not really aware. And then I have a nice little discipline of like, I don't look at my phone. I don't like read the news. I let myself sort of, detox a little from all that adrenaline. And I try to remember things that last longer, like you said, not just the thrill of the moment. But I noticed that what you're talking about is more than just a diet of information. It's actually how you digest, how you metabolize the things that are making you afraid, how you change them into things that nurture you. And that is the fucking mysterious, wonderful thing that I loved so much about your book. And so tell me more about like the place where you grew up. There are a lot of people that sort of resign themselves to, this is how I'm going to feel for the rest of my life. Talk about how you saw a window out of that.
So I grew up in the north of Ireland, where where I'm from was known for civil conflict, and that is a conflict between the people who lived here, for the most part, between people who lived here, and it has its roots at least 800 years ago. But by the late 1960s, you had two communities in the northeast corner of the island of Ireland, in a place that some people called Northern Ireland and other people called the North, or some variation on that. And between about 1968 and 1994, violence was used by various people in their words to support their political perspective. And 3,700 people were killed, 43,000 people were directly physically injured, and let's assume that hundreds of thousands of people were directly traumatized. I think the whole culture was traumatized, actually.
Yeah.
And everybody had some experience of loss along the way.
Yeah.
I was born into that. And when I was 19, there were ceasefires that have, over the last 27 years, nurtured a peace process where there is now extraordinary collaboration between people. Violence has radically reduced, and this is now a very safe place to live. It's not to say that there isn't still enmity between the communities, but one of the things I think the brain is very good at doing is it adjusts for solutions. And so, like, you may end up feeling that things are as bad as they've ever been because you're in the moment right now in an unhealthy way. You have to cast your mind back into the context of history to address, to experience the fact that change has occurred. So, somebody was just bringing me a pile of books. I don't know if it's because I need to sit on them or I'm supposed to adjust the camera. I am assuming people will tell me. So I was born into that, and there was a lot of anxiety in our culture, a lot of genuine threat. And alongside that, I was growing up in a conservative religious culture as a person who was confused about his sexuality and his sexual orientation. And it actually was my mid-30s before I made any real resolution of that. So I was carrying a message that said the outside world is unsafe, and inside you is toxic,
Oh,
or inside you is broken.
yeah.
You don't even have a safe place on the inside. And I think a lot of young LGBT people do this. We develop two personalities on the inside, a dual consciousness, and people from all kinds of marginalized groups do that, where you've got this place that is safe, which is the fantasy life, the dream life, or the world of books and movies and music and nature. And then there's the other life that a lot of the time feels like you're just totally wrong. And this system that's kind of telling you that you're wrong, it must be right. And everything in you that feels that something doesn't feel right about this, you think it's because you're rebellious, or it's because you're immature, or it's because you're sinful or broken, as opposed to, you've already said fuck, so I'm going to say it too, the fucking system's broken.
Yeah.
Right? The fucking system is broken. And the people who are holding that system up, they are perhaps more wounded than those of us who notice there's something wrong with this system. So, where I came to you, there was a really interesting thing in your question, and I think it leads to me wanting to tell a story about something that sort of embodies these energies of thinking there's something wrong, and then half of me thinking it's me that's wrong, and the other half thinking no, it's the system that's wrong.
Yeah. And
discovering that fighting against the system just knocks the energy back in your face.
And just before you tell that lovely story, I'm gonna play a song to give you a little time to, if you think it's feasible, to go into that microphone adjustment again. Yeah. But if you think it might screw something up, then just lean a little more forward. And
I'm gonna do what we did earlier and do it better.
You're so good. So while we think about that, I'm going to sing this. And there's 101 strong reasons for letting the walls close in. I know the weight of the world could crush me if I let all the darkness win. When the doubt comes down around me, I don't want to give up the fight. When the fears have finally found me, I better let in a little more light. Let in a little more sun and sanity. Let in a little more view. I want to open up my eyes to challenge me, instead of thinking that I always knew. When I feel I'm living in a little bubble, well, I'm not gonna stand for it. Gonna make some of the good kind of trouble and get my bubble to expand a bit. The good kind of trouble? I know who you're talking about. Nobody can do it for me. I gotta feel my way to get free. There's no stronger lock than the one I got on the door that I can't see. Gonna pull back the dark curtain when there ain't no hope in sight, 'cause the world is out there waiting. Just gotta let in a little more light. Let in a little more sun and sanity. Let in a little more view. I wanna open up my eyes to challenge me, instead of thinking that I always knew. When I feel I'm living in a little bubble, well, I'm not gonna stand for it. I'm gonna make some of the good kind of trouble and get my bubble to expand a bit. I'm gonna make some of the good kind of trouble and get my bubble to expand a bit.
So in April of 2005, 16 years ago this month, Pope John Paul II died, and the night after he died, some anti-Catholic graffiti went up in a number of places in Belfast, and I got a phone call the next day to say, "Have you seen what went up on the Annandale embankment?" And I drove over, and there was a wall in a parking lot for a supermarket, and somebody or somebody's had written in white paint, "Where the fuck is the Pope now? Ha ha." And they'd spelled out their laughter, which I always think is kind of this particularly insidious thing. They're really twisting the knife there. And we realized that the next day there would be a lot of people driving past that parking lot, and they would see the graffiti, and the people who had some kind of empathy for the Pope or some kind of allegiance or connection probably would have felt at the very least insulted and maybe intimidated or threatened. And there would have been some people from the Protestant community who probably would have felt a bit embarrassed to see that graffiti too, the kind of, oh, like, but you know, the kind of feeling you get when someone you know does something that you feel bad about. And then there would have been some people who would have seen the graffiti and thought, nice one, you know, we got one over on them. Again, no, it could just as easily have been the shoe on the other foot. There's been such a long history of our communities being at each other's throats. And part of the problem is lots of us like to wash our hands of that and say, that's not me. And the truth is, on at least two levels, to not participate in that kind of fractiousness, point scoring, is often an economic privilege. Actually, you know, it's easier when you live removed from places where it might be more of a struggle just to get through the day. But the other thing is, and I think this goes even deeper, none of us is just one thing. There's nobody here that's just a Protestant or just a Catholic or just Irish or just Northern Irish. We all have mixed heritage. And we've been told by the story in our society that you have to only be one thing, and that one thing includes being right and believing that they are wrong, right? It's not enough to just say, I'm part of something and they are part of something, and then over time to come to realize there really is no they. So I felt the sense of insult because of the graffiti. I felt a wee bit intimidated by it because of the graffiti. But I'm also someone who would be perceived to come from a Protestant heritage, even though that's not entirely true. And so three of us thought, we need to do something about this, and we need to do it tonight, because tomorrow people will drive past it and the damage will be done. And people will phone into the radio talk shows and they will rant about how terrible this graffiti is, and they will use words like scum to refer to the people who put the graffiti up in the first place, without realizing the irony that calling somebody scum is part of the same continuum that led the people to put the graffiti up in the first place. It's pure eye for an eye oppositional energy. So at 4 o'clock the next morning, myself and two friends went out with a big tin of paint. We had forgotten to buy a brush, and you can't buy paintbrushes at 4 o'clock on a Monday morning. So as we were leaving the house, I grabbed a bathroom sponge, and we went over to this wall in the dark with nobody around, on which it said, "Where the fuck is the Pope now? Ha ha." And we read an ancient Middle Eastern poem about turning swords into plowshares. And we took the paint and the sponge and stood in front of the wall, and we plunged our hands into the paint. It made no sense whatsoever, because we could have just dipped the sponge in, but there was something about the adrenaline of the moment, the anger, the righteous anger, the non-violent anger, the anger that overcomes violence rather than perpetuates it. And we plunged our hands in with a bathroom sponge, and then on top of the graffiti, we wrote one word 5 times. And we wrote it in such a way that people could see what was underneath, because we wanted people to see why we were saying what we were saying. We wrote the least used word in politics, and perhaps the most important word, and that is the word sorry. And we wrote it 5 times. Sorry, 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 sorry. And we were saying sorry because I was apologizing for my complicity and for denying that I have a part and that I have inherited privileges that were won unjustly. And I was saying sorry, perhaps on behalf of the people who put this up there. And I was saying sorry as somebody who benefited from economic privilege, and perhaps the people who put this up probably didn't. They were probably teenage boys who probably didn't have a whole lot better to do with their time. And then we went home and had cups of tea and bacon sandwiches as the sun came up. We didn't really tell anybody about it, but it was on the main BBC News Bulletin that night. And the next day it was on the second page of one of the main morning newspapers. And best of all, later in the week, I was told by a friend who was a community worker who worked with the community that this graffiti possibly came from, and was talking to a man of the older generation, someone who'd been in the thick of the violence in the 70s, who said that he recognized it was probably the sons of people his generation who had done this, and that his journey into violence had actually begun with sectarian graffiti, and that he was pleased that somebody had done this because he didn't want the sons of his generation to go down the same path he had done. He recognized there were legitimate needs and grievances and brokennesses and injustices in our society, but the violence was not a legitimate way to get those needs met. I kept the paint that was now staining my steering wheel because my hand up to my elbow was covered in paint when I got back into the car. I kept it on the steering wheel as a reminder that when I sometimes get into this thing of, I don't know what to do, I have no idea what to do, it just seems so overwhelming. Often what needs to happen is really simple. We just need to stop for a minute and slow down our reactions and allow another thought to occur to us. Blaise Pascal, the 17th century French mathematician and mystic, said, all the problems in the world stem from a person's inability to sit still in a room and think for 10 minutes. I don't think that what we did was really all that complicated. When I've come to think that it was kind of heroic, and that's because I've started defining heroism differently. And after you play a song, I'll say what I mean about a different definition of heroism.
Yeah, let's let that story percolate in as we listen. Lightning cracks the darkness. For a moment I can see it's just a spark to start with, but I follow where it leads. I can't spend my whole life hiding where no soul could ever thrive. I can't live with just surviving. My heart wants to feel alive. Life is change, change looks frightening. Watch that wind, I've been warned. But I live to feel this lightning in this perfect storm, this perfect storm. Here in this perfect storm. How could it possibly be perfect, Dave? Well, I see the twisting cloud that's turning where the earth and the heavens meet. I feel the voltage of that yearning for the circuit to complete. I will feel no resistance to the current that will strike. Put my life across the distance where longing turns to light. Life is change, change looks frightening. Watch that wind, I've been warned. But I live to feel this lightning. In this perfect storm, this perfect storm. Here in this perfect storm. It washes me down to my soul when a storm of these tears pours. It carries me into the flow. That's what it's here for. Life is change, change looks frightening. Watch that wind, I've been warned. But I live to feel this lightning. In this perfect storm, this perfect storm. Here in this perfect storm. The distance between those 2 points of view just had this lethal voltage to it. And you stood in that gap and let that energy come through you. And in the midst of saying, what do I do? What do I do? Well, there was one thing to do. And to have that reminder, that little white paint smeared on the steering wheel. So wherever you drive, you remember. There is something to do. Tell us about it.
So, we have this unhealthy hero archetype in our society, and I'm going to use Rambo as the most obvious example. Rambo is a problem, but he's actually onto something. And this came clear to me a couple of weeks ago when a friend of mine, who kind of reminds me of Rambo physically, gave me an insight into his definition of true heroism. He says that true heroism is the act of creating safety for people more vulnerable than I am. And a truer form of heroism is the act of creating safety for people who are more vulnerable than I am without harming anybody else. And the ultimate heroism is the act of creating safety for people more vulnerable than I am without harming anybody else, and also loving myself at the same time. And so I'm just intrigued to follow this thread. This is a new thought for me. There's a lot of us, and I'm assuming most of the people watching right now are quite tender-hearted people. They don't tend to be Rambo types, and they may tend to resist the Rambo archetype. I even feel a little scared of the Rambo archetype. But I want to suggest we're probably also people who really want to care for vulnerable folks. We're probably all people who want to protect people more vulnerable than we are and not harm anybody along the way. And that's 2/3 of the way to being a healthy, integrated, enlightened Rambo, because Rambo wants to take care of vulnerable people too. He just hasn't figured out that you can do that without wreaking havoc all over the place. And so when I think back to us painting that graffiti out, like I say, it wasn't that complex. It only took us a minute to figure out what to do. And it was a little nerve-wracking at the time. But I think it was an embodiment of the spirit of overcoming fear through doing something positive, rather than fighting against fear or really fighting against anything. We were just incarnating or embodying the better world. We were following in the spirit of an old teaching that gets summarized as be the change you want to see in the world. And that actually, I think, is the answer to all fear. Fear is not the same thing as danger. And as I've said, there are things that is legitimate to respect. Let's respect the edge of a cliff, you know? But the best thing we can do to overcome fear is to enact the kind of world we want to see. And for me, that would be a world in which people breathed a little more slowly and moved a little more slowly, and were in interdependent communities where we really did get to know each other and share each other's burdens.
I like that. I'm going to sing this. I'm looking at the paintings in this great museum. The news of one more shooting made me long to cry. I'd love to work for justice and for peace and freedom, but right now I need a refuge that is quiet and dry. So I come to see the beauty when the world is tragic. An umbrella stops the rain, but it won't dry the sky. And this play of light and shadow is transcendent magic, and it changes the whole universe, at least inside. In the ocean deep, when these waves are steep, every hope I keep betrays me. It's the beautiful that saves me. So I'm walking past these priceless works of famous artists, but in between those canvases, its cold white wall, these painters found a crucible for their catharsis, but they knew that no rendition could contain it all. I'm fearful of the riptide in the sea of sorrow, and I don't have any faith to make these waters part. And if I venture out there, I would drown a martyr, and it feels so overwhelming I can barely start. In the ocean deep, when these waves are steep, every hope I keep betrays me. It's the beautiful that saves me. Now the woman at the coat check hands me back my raincoat. Stay warm out there, she smiles and looks me in the eye. I take her simple kindness like we're in the same boat, and we all need some protection from the storm outside. We are underneath the cloud of all this dark emotion, but I'll make it through the storm because I've warmed my heart. A wooden hull can rest above a deep, dark ocean, and a window into beauty is a place to start. In the ocean deep, when these waves are steep, every hope I keep betrays me. It's the beautiful that saves me. It's the beautiful that saves me. Gareth, what's that thing you say about the best critique of something is the example of...
Rich, or the best criticism of the bad is the practice of the better. Do you remember what the process of writing that song was?
Yeah, the
Trick question because I remember it, but
the
and
notion of
it,
where we find shelter. And you have
yeah.
a lot to say about shelter. It was a lot inspired by you talking about, well, what do you mean by shelter? It goes a long way. Yeah.
So if it's the beautiful that saves you, what does that mean on a day where you hear another shitty news story
Yeah.
or another frightening thing
Yeah. I think
for you?
it really speaks to the choice that we have, and not just, like I said, a diet of don't listen to this or don't listen to that, but the choice of remembering that, humans have dealt with all kinds of things that it's really good to be afraid of, and still there is a way to learn about that whole process and the choices that we have in our own minds with our own attention, and also with our brave hearts and spirits to metabolize these terrifying things and turn them into energy, which we can use. that was that was what I was trying to remind myself of in this song.
Okay, so there's beauty which exists, you know, it's out there and it's in here. What for you are some of the things that wake you up to remember that? Because I think lots of us, like, we know it's there, but we don't remember. And because of the negativity or the anxiety bias in our brains and our culture, and the fact that, frankly, explosions sound louder than a flower gradually blooming. You got to listen really, really closely to hear a flower bloom. And you could be miles and miles away from an explosion. And part of the challenge is the amygdala, the fear devices in your brain can't distinguish between a gunshot and a car backfiring.
Yeah.
So what helps you remember?
I think for me, the remembering that I can be more of service, more useful for the good, if I don't debilitate my own nervous system by just terrorizing myself. And so it was interesting. It actually at first seemed a little selfish to be blissed out in the midst of a world where there is so much terror. And yet,
Mm.
what I realized was, for the sake of others, I need to be in shape emotionally, energetically, and not just beaten down. So I needed to find a way to trick the bitterness and to kind of find a way to say, I still have a choice of what I do with my concentration and my energy.
And are there, so I love this, to trick the bitterness. Can you name like some of the practices that you use?
There are times when I come busting out of the house and I run, and I just run as if I need to say to my body, I understand there's way too much adrenaline in your bloodstream. Can I help? you know? Because there are times when I just have to respond with that sort of animal energy to make sense of the sort of primal reactions that are going on in my amygdala, you know?
And I would guess that that doesn't mean that the world is any more or less dangerous than it was before you stepped out of the house to run, right?
Right.
The social facts are still the
Yeah,
facts,
yeah.
but your experience of them is different, right?
Yeah. It feels more like all of that is true, and there are more options than just hiding. Emotionally, there are ways to be a light in the dark.
So I think that you're talking about building shelter. And you know that one time I walked up a mountain in the west of Ireland with 40 other people, and we were walking. We didn't know where we were going. The person leading us allegedly knew where we were going, but he was the kind of leader who, he taught me a lot. And actually, this is the way I like to lead retreats now, is to kind of not tell people what's going to happen and just let it unfold. And part of the reason for that is that mystery is part of what a fully rounded human life should be. We already have enough predictability Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, and with email, it's nice sometimes to have some surprises. And I know there's some people watching now who've been on these retreats with us, but my friend was leading people up this mountain, and as we got halfway up the mountain, and maybe a little more than halfway, when it was like no turning back. If we turn back now, it's going to take us longer to get down the mountain than it will to get to the top. And there was a sense of, we've got to get to this peak. Driving, freezing rain started to come down sideways. And it was like these little darts or paper cuts across the face as we were walking up the mountain. It was really unpleasant. And we just were slogging and slogging and slogging. And eventually we get to the top. And there was a stone shelter. Just a little, it looked like a medieval garage if people had cars in the Middle Ages. A wall on one side, a wall at the back, and a roof. No wall at the front, no door, just an open space. And a little altar, because it was used for some religious rituals. And we all squeezed in behind the altar, all 40 of us. And there wasn't enough room for anybody to do more than be like a sardine. And people's breathing started to slow down. And the leader of the group asked me, would you tell the story that you told me the other night? It will warm us. And it was just a funny little story. But the truth was, it did warm us on the inside, and we were warmed physically by being under the shelter. But the thing is, the shelter did not stop the rain. The rain kept falling. And in fact, I think it was still falling when we finally left the shelter. The shelter didn't fight against the rain. The shelter instead engaged in the best criticism of the bad. Instead of fighting back or arguing with or trying to work a magic spell that would somehow make the rain go away, what the shelter did was it just made the rain less relevant. And I think that your practice of running, and I know that, from eating many, many meals in your house, a practice of investing in the most attractive and appealing and nutritious and tasty food. Nance has said to me on many occasions that there's a virtuous circle when it comes to what we put in our bodies, that the best food, the most healing food, the tastiest food, the most colorful food, the food that's best for the ecosystem and that we will feel better after eating, it's all the same food. Yeah. And the food that we don't feel good after eating, this is not about puritanical stuff or counting calories, but the food that's like going to leave us feeling sluggish and emotionally worse is also the least healthy. It looks the worst. It doesn't have much color to it, and it's usually been either farmed in an unethical way or processed in a way that hasn't helped human beings to flourish, never mind if it was an animal product or a plant product. So I think that there's practices, and I know that some of us, when we hear the word practices, we like a wall goes up because it's like, oh, that sounds like school, or that sounds like when you have to do your times table. And I've had that reaction too. But something started to happen to me lately where I've started to think about the practices that people have introduced me to, like a simple breathing exercise that maybe we'll do before the end of our session today, that you could see it as a chore, or you could see it as, I get to do this. Like, I'm not a runner, but I know that there are runners who have ecstasy in their hearts when they run. Something happens. And I know a guy who did a 24-hour run once. That's not going to work for me, at least not yet. but I can totally tune into the experience of the ecstatic running through my body through things like breathing exercises or reading or being in particular forms of nature or the slow preparation of a beautiful meal with friends or a really thrilling storytelling session. So for me, there's a breathing exercise, and then there's a little communal exercise that we do in circles where we get to know each other better, that are two practices that you kind of have to do them a little bit like a chore, in the same way that if I wanted to run a marathon today, I couldn't do it. It would probably be dangerous for my body to try to run a marathon. It might actually damage me to try to run a marathon today. But if I wanted to run 6 months from now, I could put in the practice in order to experience the ecstasy in 6 months' time. And that's a new thought for me. And I think it's a new thought for lots of us, particularly if we were raised in a religious culture that told us, do these things or you'll be in trouble or God won't like you, as opposed to being human is an opportunity to breathe more slowly, or it's an opportunity to be in circles with friends and get to know each other better and bear each other's burdens, or you can get to run if you're a runner. And these things will produce sometimes ecstasy, sometimes the transcendent, but definitely shelter. And the world, in terms of its social facts, may or may not change, but your relationship to them will change radically. And I think that the more I do these things, the more I feel capable of enacting myself onto the world in a way that serves the common good, rather than just have the world happen to me.
Oh. Yeah. The most terrified I was wound up being a way to wake me up. And I hold it as a kind of a sacred experience. Because it was a way of knowing that the forces involved in this life of mine are vast and mysterious and powerful. It was a fascinating experience of knowing how powerless I was, and yet not feeling the terror in a way that stifled me, but more brought me to life. Spring break had a warm spell, warm enough for camping, and we bicycled the high road when the gates were down. The parkway was closed off, there were branches on the pavement, and without the noise of engines, there were wilder sounds. It might have been a mountain lion, it might have been a bear. When we woke up in the darkness, there was terror in the air. The veil was only nylon, and we knew that it could tear. We didn't know what we were scared of, but we knew it was right there. The tent was no protection, and we were being studied, and we both woke up afraid. Here we live or die. Something was deciding, the spirit of the mountain, and if we passed the judgment, we might not know why. It might have been a mountain lion, it might have been a bear. When we woke up in the darkness, there was terror in the air. The veil was only nylon, and we knew that it could tear. We didn't know what we were scared of, but we knew it was right there. The night went by so slow, till the sunlight showed the road. The pavement was a miracle. Our bicycles could glide down from the adrenaline of being terrified from the higher elevation and the rarefied down to civilization from the wilder side. It might have been a mountain lion, it might have been a bear. When we woke up in the darkness, there was terror in the air. The veil was only nylon, and we knew that it could tear. We didn't know what we were scared of, but we knew it was right there.
So I think I'll read a little blessing from this new book, How Not to Be Afraid, whose cover I just think is adorable.
Yes.
I'm very grateful to the publishers for producing such a lovely cover. This is called A Blessing for Seeing in the Dark. And my definition of dark comes from Virginia Woolf through Rebecca Solnit, who wrote this marvelous book called Hope in the Dark. And she quotes Virginia Woolf talking about the future is dark. And she doesn't mean what is usually meant when people say dark. And of course, first of all, there's the racist connotations of the use of the word dark to equate to something bad. So there's that, which is a problem in the first place. But then there's this tendency to look at the darkness as being all unpleasant, all threatening, all scary. When actually it's just dark. And all it means is that we don't know what might be there. The Dalai Lama was once asked what he thought would be the best thing that US Americans could do to be more spiritually healthy. And he said, consider going to bed when it gets dark and waking up when it's light. I imagine that's a spiritual practice like you're running, that over time would kind of reset our neurobiology and our spirits and our minds. And when I say mind, I'm talking about something more than my brain. I mean, it's my body as well. So when I say a blessing for seeing in the dark, I'm not saying that we live in a time of badness or a time of danger. I think we live in a time where it's just not quite clear in the way that we used to think it was clear. And I'm not saying it used to be clear. I'm saying we used to think it was clear. I don't think we were right back then.
How about Mayhan Seiler's quote?
So Mayhan Seiler, who's an elder in our lives, and a man who's too humble to accept being called wise, but he is wise, said to me that the main thing that privileged people like us, like you and me, Dave, and perhaps many of the people watching, the main thing that privileged people have lost in the last few years is a false sense of certainty about the future. You know, we thought that we knew what the future was going to be like, that there would be this constant progress and evolution toward ever increasing security. And actually, I think that there's no less actual security around today than there ever was. We just are going through a time of shaking where our subjective sense of what matters and what we could rely on is being shaken. And so if you're feeling shaken at the moment, that's only to be expected. There's a lot of information out there, and it's hard to tell what's factual, what's propaganda, what's conspiracy, and what's wisdom. It's hard. Now, the beautiful thing is you can learn to breathe more slowly and get into interdependent circles with other spiritually seeking, emotionally maturing people and help discern what's real and what's not, or what's more real and what's less real. We're never going to apprehend the perfect. So this blessing is for those of us who feel this sense of uncertainty, who feel that we're in darkness right now. And hopefully it'll offer a little bit of shelter to those of us who want to believe that the darkness isn't necessarily bad, it's just dark. No one can know your darkness like you can. And even you will not know it unless you face it. Strange, I know, to imagine facing something you cannot see. But there are things that can only be found in the dark. There is light that can only be seen in the dark. There may even be fragments or dimensions of love that will only touch you if you let them visit you in the dark. You are not here just to save the world, but to be changed. So, may nighttime bring you in touch with memory, an examine of the day with gratitude and learning of the year, of your life and the 7 generations that brought you here, and with possibility of the year of your life and the 7 generations to come. May you wake from your dreams laughing and carry innocence becoming wonder wherever you go. May you tread lightly on the earth. Know that she belongs to you, and in her is your belonging too. One little footnote, the line there about there's light that can only be seen in the dark comes from the Irish shaman John Moriarty, who told a story once about how he was in his cottage at night, and it was overlooking the sea, and it was an extraordinary full moon, and he saw the full moon outside the window, and it was just this exquisite, transcendent thing. And then he switched on a little table light to read by. And when he switched that light on, the moon disappeared.
Yeah.
And he realized, in order for me to be able to see this miraculous light, I have to switch the light off.
Yeah.
I need to go into darkness to be able to see this light. And so I want to offer this just briefly, and I look forward to whatever your next song is, Dave. But if you're in a time right now where it feels like the darkness has no end, and where it feels like you're in the scary part of the darkness, or the traumatic, or the painful, or the oppressive, or persecuting part of the darkness, or maybe if you're one of those, I think this happens to all of us, but if it happens to be your turn right now to be living under what seems like an unbearable darkness, I want to say to you that the history of human beings who think about these things, and who I've learned from, and we've all learned from, says that today is not your forever. It might not end tomorrow, or the next day, or even this month, or this year. But there are times where we are all called to cross the stream and go into, this is the Easter weekend if you're in the Christian tradition, but there's lots of traditions that speak of similar things, to go into the Garden of Gethsemane and to have an ordeal that maybe can only be authenticated by feeling endless, by feeling like it'll never have an end. And then a time will come when you leave that garden and cross the stream in the other direction. And when you do that, you will have something to give to the world. So if that's where you are right now, you don't have to stay there on your own. And I hope you'll reach out maybe to other people on this call, or to contact us. We can help put you in touch with people who are good at helping think these things through. I am one of the people.
Tell us about porch circles. I have loved being in one with you.
Yeah. So this, we basically, my husband Brian and I stole a really good idea, but the person we stole it from died about 800 years ago. So I think we're probably okay. His name was Saint Ignatius of Loyola, and he had this thing called the examen. It was 2 questions. One question, the way he put it, was, what are the sources of consolation since we last met? And another way of putting that is, what's going well? The second question would be, what are the sources of desolation? And another way of putting that would be, what's not going so well? So, what's bringing you life and what's draining your life? Yeah. And we gather in circles of between 3 to 12 people. It only takes 3 people to start one of these. Have a cup of coffee and experiment with those 2 questions. What's bringing you life and what's draining your life? And then there's a third question. And I think this question is extremely important, particularly in the current cultural moment. There's a lot of really good mindfulness stuff out there, but it's only half complete if it stays inward focused. And there's a lot of kind of self-centered spiritual practices available. And I think they actually become corrosive. They're like drinking rusty water after a while. Now, if you're practicing them authentically, they will inexorably lead you into service for the world. So the third question is, what do you feel called to do to serve the common good from the place where your wounds and your gifts meet each other? And it can be as simple as, I feel called to have eye contact with the person serving me at the checkout. Or if I'm working at the checkout, I feel called to have eye contact with the customer. And that's a really countercultural thing. And it can go to deeper and more profound things than that. And then the last question, the fourth question, having heard what we've heard, how can we help each other? Is there something that you want to request from this circle, or is there something you want to offer somebody else in the circle, knowing that you might not get it, but that's sometimes 2/3 or 3/4 of getting it, actually, is just to name the need. Yeah. Even if someone can't fulfill the need for you, just to name it and be heard. And those questions are on the Porch Magazine's website. Go to theporchmagazine.com and click on community circles. And we just encourage people, pick 2 other people to have a cup of coffee with and experiment with those questions. And then work it for a while, like 6 months to prepare for a marathon. Yeah. And see what happens.
It's fascinating, that sense of having backup, having community. And I have so loved that feeling of sort of like the accountability that you have when you write in a journal and you are tracking how you're doing, and you become more aware of the consequences of the choices that we're making. It's really good for me. So this is about back across the river. You may not know where you're going, but we make the way by walking. 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 We meet on the mountainside. Distant dream of the land we've seen will be our only guide. We left the front door open, no key for a souvenir. Where to go, and all we know is home will not be here. The path remains unclear. We make the way by walking. We make the way by walking. Circle. We left the city lights. We came up here where the air is clear and the stars are bright at night. Maybe there's a distant valley, maybe it's a ways away. But we're all here on the new frontier, 'cause we knew we could not stay. We knew we could not stay. We make the way by walking. We make the way by walking. I climbed a little bit higher, some things you cannot unsee. I climbed a little bit further, and the climbing set me free. And then you were walking with me, and you asked if I knew the way. I made you laugh when I said our path might be a road someday, might be a road someday. our steps are the votes we cast. The crazy few that have seen this view may not be the last. The way that a pilgrim travels is to set off for parts unknown. But if history's kind, we're the ones who may find the way we all come home. We make the way by walking. 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 Step by step, day by day, you have made the way, and you have written a book about it. Thank you, Gareth.
Well, you know what I'm going to say. I always say it in that song. Do you want to say it for me?
It was really fun singing that song for the first time for you when you came across that phrase that there are things that we can't unsee. And I was using that phrase to mean, I have seen the promised land. And that was a fun change for you, because growing up where you grew up, things that you can't unsee always had this subtext of terror. Oh.
Yeah, I had always thought of the idea that the things you can't unsee are the things you don't want to have ever seen.
Yeah.
And of course, there are things, and there are trigger moments in all our lives, traumas in all our lives. And with the right care and attention, we can actually begin to learn to respond to those triggers by letting ourselves be triggered into the present. And sometimes this actually happens for me, that I'm triggered by something painful, and I have enough support around me, or there's enough awake in my mind to go, oh, the reason I'm feeling this distress is because I'm grieving the beauty.
Yeah.
And then that kind of leads me into what else is beautiful and what else can I claim and be grateful for. But even more so, there are beautiful things that we can't unsee.
Yeah.
There are kind things that we can't unsee. We just have a cultural and a neurological negativity bias. I tell a funny story. If my mother is watching, I love you, Mom, and it's been great spending so much time with you lately. Here's a little funny vignette that sort of sums this up for me. Brian and I were watching one of the most romantic films ever made. It's a film called A Matter of Life and Death with David Niven and Kim Hunter by Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger. A Matter of Life and Death. Please watch it if you haven't seen it. It ends on this crescendo note of joy. And as soon as it ended and the credits began to roll, my mum decided that this was the time to tell us about something awful that had happened in David Niven's life, right? And it was almost like she'd been waiting the whole way through the movie to tell us. Now, she claims joy too. I think she was just participating in this cultural negativity bias. I want to tell you about how this showed up in my dreams, but it looks like you want to play a song first.
I think you should go for the telling about
Tell
the dream. Yeah.
Tell the dream story.
Yeah.
So another example of this was a few years ago. I had the most horrifying nightmare I've ever had. And I'm not going to go into the details of the plot of the nightmare, but it was genuinely horrifying. And I woke up screaming. And I wear a CPAP mask. So, if you've ever slept with or been a person who wears a CPAP mask and you're screaming into the mask, that's quite unpleasant for anybody else who might be in the room. But I was lucky, because the reason I woke up is because Brian was waking me. He had heard my distress in the nightmare. He'd heard me starting to scream. And so he put his hand on my back to wake me up. And I woke up in this, heart racing, blood pumping, still with the last images of the nightmare in my mind, to hear Brian with his hand on my back say, "You're okay. You're okay. you have what you need. And then he rolled over and went straight back to sleep. And he has no conscious memory of doing this because this is the kind of thing he does. And I knew that he was right, that I had within me what I needed. And so I started to breathe more slowly, to regulate my breathing. And I started to think about alternatives to the nightmare, not to try to put the nightmare out of my mind by opposing it, but to start to think about, okay, I'm here in this room, I'm in this bed, there's a roof over me, I can breathe, and in the morning I'll be able to think about this differently. That's the first part of the story. The second part is that sometime later than this, I had another dream. And it was the psychological and emotional spiritual opposite of the nightmare. The other dream that I had was a really simple plot, and I will tell you the plot because it's pleasant. And it's a dream about something that really happened in my life. It was 1986. I was 11 years old. I had fallen in love with Back to the Future. Really with Marty McFly's character as an avatar of someone with the most exciting life that an 11-year-old from the north of Ireland could ever imagine. Being on the skateboard, holding the back of the Jeep, never mind being in the DeLorean. And in the dream, I was listening to my little generic Walkman. We couldn't afford the Sony brand model. And I was listening to Huey Lewis and the News singing The Power of Love. And that was the dream. I was walking down the street listening to Huey Lewis and the News singing The Power of Love, wearing a pair of green shorts. And I woke up from the dream. And this time, the feeling was the feeling you have when you want to stay in the dream. Because it feels so good, whatever's going on. And you're like, oh, I've woken up and I want to go back into this dream. But this was unusual because I woke up with The Power of Love playing in my ears and with the feeling of being 11 years old and innocent and free. No shame, no cynicism. Walking down the street, totally in the zone of this music, which, you know, lest we forget, is literally called The Power of Love. And I realized that the feeling that I had when I was 11 years old, walking on air, listening to this song, feeling invincible, protected, powerful, safe, and fully alive, that feeling that my 11-year-old self still existed in my body. Because my 11-year-old self who believed those things still exists in my body. And that my nightmares are no more true than my happy dreams. And that when I'm awake, I think we're dreaming the world the whole time anyway. It doesn't mean there's no objective reality, but like me doing that to my hand right now, it happens first of all in my mind before it's a physical act. It's an infinitesimally small period of time between the mind and the physical act. But my interpretation of the feeling that my hand is happening is a story that I am inventing or co-creating alongside with this external reality too. The main point is our nightmares are no more real than our dreams. And some things you can't unsee applies to the joyous moment of walking down the street, listening to Huey Lewis and the News, singing The Power of Love and believing that that song is true.
That song is true. Oh, this is a love song, and this is a very sweet song about being afraid. It's a song about deciding to push past the fear and be brave with your heart. It uses the image of skydiving. I saw the leaves riding on the morning wind, easy, slow circles as they fall. I could feel the blue sky call. did a search. I found a little ground school near an airfield that isn't far to drive. We could take a blue sky dive. Fear, finally time to face these heights. Here, I hope this diamond fits you right. Riding in the plane, waiting with our jumpsuits on, wind blasting through the open door. Love has made my heart want more. See the world from way up here. Free, soaring through the atmosphere. And when the winter comes and the sky is cold and gray, we'll keep the endless summer blue, and I will be in love with you.
I want to just introduce one little practice that any of us can do anywhere. It's best not to do it while operating heavy machinery, but the heaviest machinery I think any of us operate is our mind. If we can learn this practice, it's like the thing comes into being that we always believed was there, and we start to wake up in the dream rather than always seeing nightmares around us. So I just invite you to, wherever you are right now, to slow down your breathing like I'm doing, and not to force it, just to let it slow down. You're not taking big gulps. You're just breathing more like this rhythm. And as you breathe, I invite you to close your eyes and in your mind's eye, see or call to your mind an image or a thought that conveys gratitude, love, or compassion. It can be a person's face. It could be a place. It could be words that someone spoke to you. It can be a fictional character. As long as it stirs a memory of gratitude, compassion, or love. When I do this, I like to visualize a drive-in movie theater screen in the desert. And as I breathe in, the image on the screen gets clearer and sharper. And so as you breathe in, let the image get clearer and sharper. Gratitude, compassion, or love. And we're going to breathe in and breathe out 2 more times, and then I'm going to give you one more instruction. So just breathe it in. Breathe out. Breathe in. And breathe out. But this time, as you breathe it in, just hold it for a second or two. And when you breathe out, send that image to every cell of your body. And do that one more time. Breathe in, and when you breathe out, send it and feel it going to your extremities, the tips of your fingers and toes and the top of your head. That is the simplest form of this breathing exercise. It can be extended to, when you exhale, to send it to people you know who need it, and to people all around the world, and to the entire planet, or to the little finger on your right hand. This is for a small world and a cosmic person. You can do it for a minute, or you can do it for 24 hours a day. I promise you, if you get into the habit of doing it, even for 1 minute a day, things will change in terms of how you're oriented to fear, because you'll find that your very self becomes its own shelter, and a shelter for others too. I want to say one other thing as we move toward wrapping up, and I'm sure we'll finish with a song. Dave and I know this person called Nance, and Dave knows her a whole lot better than I do. And I was talking to Nance once, because Nance is like one of my teachers and heroes and mentors and friends. And I was thanking her for how much she teaches me about this kind of stuff and how much she embodies it. And she said to me, I appreciate you saying that, but I need you to know, I don't live there all the time, but I do like to visit. And I'm visiting more often, this place of where the breathing takes us. And so I want to say, Dave and I don't live in this place that we're talking about today. Brian was saying to me before we came in, say that you live there 80% of the time. I don't know about you. I mean, Dave, maybe you live there 80% of the time. I think I might live there 52.4% of the time. But I am learning to visit more often. And the more I visit, the more I don't need to make appointments to visit, the more I just find that I'm there. And so whether you're 1% or 99% living there, there's always room for something more to happen. There's always room for your story to change. And as I've said, if you want to connect with us, connect through Porch Circles, go to theporchmagazine.com and you can connect with me that way. If you want to know more about the ideas around fear that I've been exploring, this book, How Not to Be Afraid, is available. You can find out more about it at hownotobeafraid.com. And if you'd like to make a contribution to support Dave's work and my work, there's a tip jar link in the comments section there, and we'll share whatever comes in today. But there's no obligation for that. Just contribute from your heart or pay it forward. And we look forward to seeing you another time. Dave does these things on Facebook Live a lot, and you can find out the schedule at davidwilcoxmusic.com. And I'm going to be doing some more events around the book, and those will be posted on the Porch's website too. And Dave, I want to thank you for how much I really don't think this book would exist without your presence in my life and what you've taught me. And I really, you've helped me believe in the things that you already saw inside me, and that's what a friend is supposed to do.
I'm so grateful. I have that poster of one of our gatherings where they made this lovely poster with the photograph of us, and the title of it
I know the poster.
How Not to Be Afraid. And once we get gathering again in person, I'm sure we could help you guys organize some community gathering where Gareth and I show up. And Gareth, I am very grateful to you. This is a lovely conversation, and there is some stuff I'm looking forward to today, the gathering with our next door neighbors at the outdoor fire. And I imagine the sweetness of living where you are now and having that beautiful contrast and that nice sort of weaving of the two parts of your life. because you're back in Northern Ireland. So I am looking forward to so much now, and I think I live in that sweet spot more of the time now, and it's a steady practice. But sometimes just facing the thing I'm afraid of and welcoming it into my heart to speak and being tender with it and just saying, I hear you, you're afraid, and just letting myself feel it. It's fascinating how fast it changes. It's almost as if once I get the message, then it has more information. And the information is about how to transform the fear. So I'm grateful for all of this. So I think we have done a really good hour and a half, and we should probably leave it there. But I'll just say, no pretending, the truth is safe to say. Start with the ending, get it out of the way. Thanks, Gareth.
Thanks, Dave. Thanks, everybody else. Blessings of courage and peace to you this weekend. We'll see you again.
Now, Gareth, you have to hit the end live video button. Do you see it? It's red.
I'm
Bottom
very excited
left.
to do that. I'm learning so much. I'm ending live video.
See ya, y'all.
See ya.